Question number 3, the Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister.
Order.
Does he stand by his statement that, yes, there is a housing issue in New Zealand?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, and that's why the government has responded to the Productivity Commission and is working with local councils on the underlying problems of land supply, building and resource consents, provision of infrastructure.
I apologise, Right Honourable Prime Minister. Now look, the member's leader asked a question. I imagine he's interested in the answer, and too much interjection is not reasonable. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes, and that's why the government has responded to the Productivity Commission and is working with local councils on the underlying problems of land supply, building and resource consents, provision of infrastructure and productivity in the construction sector. I also stand by the statement I made yesterday in relation to this issue. I reckon they were in fantasy land.
Now going on a little long. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How many houses does he guarantee will be built as a result of his government's package that he announced on the 29th of October?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, more than the number that Labor will produce in Auckland.
Point of order, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, that was a pretty straight question. It just asked for a number.
What is it about a point of order the national ministers' benches don't understand in terms of being silent? The House is just so rowdy today. Now, when a person asks how many, I think it's unreasonable just to expect a single figure answer. I mean, but the Prime Minister needs to do his best, though, to give some information about how many. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the answer is more than the number of $300,000 houses that Labor will ever produce in Auckland, given the median price of a house in Auckland is currently $530,000. The medium section price is
Order. That's sufficient answer given the question asked. The Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the point of order. I think that the Prime Minister could at least give a ballpark figure about how many houses his package will be able to provide.
Again, I say to national ministerial benches, that was a point of order. And only the Speaker can determine whether or not it's a valid point of order, not members. They must listen to it in silence so that the Speaker can hear it. Now, the reason why there are more supplementary questions, if the quality of the answer wasn't sufficient, and I accept the member has some grounds for not thinking the quality of the answer was quite what he might have expected, there are further supplementaries that dig into that, what more meant, if he thinks that's a wise supplementary. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, what proportion of the houses that he hopes to build will be in the affordable category of houses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, it depends on what the member means by I intend to build. I don't intend to build any houses.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree with Murray Sherwin when he said, quote, "We no longer build the starter homes that allow young families to get started in a decent home. We can build them cheaper. We should be building them cheaper. We need to, and if not, why not?"
The Right
Speaker, I do agree with Murray Sherwin, and that's why the government has been doing quite a lot of work looking at this issue. But let's have a dose of reality, because let's just take the average section cost at Hobsonville, an area the Labor Party know well. The bare land cost was approximately...
Would the foghorn at the back please desist from his interjections? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Point of order, Dr. David Clark.
With respect, Mr Speaker, my interjections today have been rare. That I believe is my third today in the whole of question time, Mr Speaker.
Now look, this is getting beyond a joke. Members don't take on the Speaker in that way if they want to stay in the House. The members' interjections have been, in my view, unreasonable. He's not the only one. Members sitting against the back walls should know that their voices project across the House loudly and need to be a little more reasonable. I've got to be able to hear, and I cannot. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I have enormous sympathy with the member. He's not the only David sitting in the back row that wants to make a noise and be the leader.
Leader of the Opposition. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he stand by his statement that building homes for low-income people in Hobsonville is economic vandalism? And if so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, that was in relation to the building of state houses on prime land at Hobsonville. And yes, I do stand by that. And I go back to, let's go back to Hobsonville. Let's go back to Hobsonville because the bare land at Hobsonville was bought from Defence at roughly $46,000. The land that went to the council for roads and reserves was $46,000. The infrastructure cost that largely went to the council was another $80,000. The professional consultants and selling costs were $18,000, and the consenting fees. Look, this isn't a Labor Party caucus meeting.
Order.
I know that's the way you talk to each other there.
Order. Now, order. In the past, I've had to ask the Attorney-General to look after a certain minister sitting next to him during question time. I'm now asking the senior opposition whip, please, to take care of the member on his left, to just have him interject a little more reasonably. It is just, today's performance is not a good look. Believe me.
So, Mr. Speaker,
I think we've heard sufficient answer. Sufficient answer. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I was in the middle of answering a serious question that was interrupted by endless interruptions by the opposition senior whip. It was a serious point. I wasn't being smart about it. I was simply making the point about costs. I think I should be allowed to finish.
Well, the thing is, though, that the question was a certain question, and the Prime Minister's information was a little more additional and less absolutely essential to answer the question. I let him go on till he started to respond to the interjections, but answers can't be too long. A lot of information had been provided. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why does he say that building homes for $300,000 in Auckland is impossible when the New Zealand Housing Foundation, backed by the Tyndall Foundation, is already building homes in Auckland for that price?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr. Speaker, if one goes and has a look at the Social Housing Fund as a good example of subsidised housing that the government supports, then across the entire of New Zealand, the average price is $409,000, and in Auckland it's $431,000. That's coming from the Social Housing Fund. If you go and have a look at a basic place, a large piece of land like Hobsonville, the total cost of the land is about $200,000 on average for a 250 square metre section, of which $80,000 alone is development contributions to the council. So that member is saying he can build on land that is less than almost half of the development contributions from the council. That's why he's in fantasy land.
Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister, has he heard of any reports that would encourage the building of at least one house for $300,000?
The Right Honourable
Mr.
Prime
Speaker, I
Minister.
have. I've seen the reports that there would be interest to build one house for $300,000 in Lumsden. The advice I've had is it's possible to build a house for $300,000 in Lumsden. That house would contain David Cunliffe and it would be called the Dog House.
Order. Question number 4, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for whānau ora.